Hi, so I am sharing some information with family members, and I thought I should do a video as there's a lot of people who could use this information. And I'm going to give a preamble before I start to share information, because I think context really matters. Now, for the majority of people, the word prepping comes with a whole host of notions of some quack who feels that everybody's out to get them and maybe wears a tinfoil hat. And I understand that there are some stereotypes, and those stereotypes exist. Those people exist. They do. But that being prepared should not be equated with tinfoil hats and angry people standing down their driveways with guns, because that's not what it is. I have always been an adamant supporter of being prepared. One of my last assignments in one of my courses at Harvard was in a persuasive speech class. And I chose to do that project on the need to be prepared. Now, this was when the floods had just hit Calgary. So I don't know if you remember, this was before the Stampede. It was several years ago, and it was very intense. And I was very distraught at having to be in Boston during that time, as I have a lot of friends and people that I care about very deeply in Calgary. And so I chose this topic. And the premise of that speech was that being prepared is not a Chicken Little mentality, that the sky is falling, but it's a leadership mentality, to be prepared, to know what you need, and to have had forethought on those things. And I truly believe that that is the case. So that's a little bit of context of where I'm approaching this from. It's not from the sky is falling perspective, but that we can really minimize the impact of any type of emergency on our families by being prepared. So what kind of emergencies am I talking about? It could be somebody who is a breadwinner in the family becoming ill and not being able to work. That's an emergency. If somebody who does not have financial reserves becomes ill, they can very quickly get to a dire state. Another example of an emergency is like the Calgary floods. That's an emergency. It can limit the availability of water from treatment plants. This happened a lot in southern Alberta, where I grew up, where we would have flooding and the water treatment plant couldn't keep up with all the sediment, and so people didn't have potable water sometimes, or it was limited how much they would have. So that's an emergency, potentially. Things like tornadoes, hurricanes, drought, all of these can become emergencies, and these are all potential reasons to be prepared. Now, we have a case right now where it could really be useful to be prepared, and that's the case of a pandemic. I don't believe in hysteria in emergencies, but I also acknowledge that I'm fortunate to not have to get hysterical because I am prepared. What does preparedness look like? Very basic preparedness could include having a little bit of cash stashed away just in case. And by stashed away, I mean like in a bank account or in a lockbox, a safe in your house, somewhere secure. And ideally, this should be 3 months worth of your expenses. That's really hard to get to. It took me a long time to get to that point where I could have 3 months of money set aside. So even having a couple $100s makes a really big difference in an actual emergency to, let's say, fill up your fuel tank or go buy some groceries. So that's one thing that preparedness can mean. Preparedness can mean having extra food in the house. Now, there's different levels of emergency and there's different levels of preparedness. And depending on where you live, it's going to really matter as to how much you would want to have set aside for food. There are those who, very much like me, believe in having a year's supply of food available. Now, I live off-grid, and what that means is I produce a lot of my food, and by a lot I mean most, over 90%. And I preserve it. And because there's only one summer every year to grow food in, that means I have to preserve a year's worth of food until I get to the next summer. Another thing, and now, if you're not in a situation like I am, where I live off-grid and produce my own food, having even a couple of weeks of food stored is great. And believe it or not, there's a lot of people who don't. There's a lot of people who live 2 weeks at a time, and from paycheck to paycheck, essentially. And they have enough food for them to get through that period and nothing more. So what I'm suggesting is a basic amount to have would be 2 weeks more than you typically have. So if you normally have a week's worth of groceries at a time that you go and pick up, slowly accumulating pantry items like rice and pasta, canned meat, canned veggies, just 2 weeks worth is a really great idea. And it could just be that you're laid off and in between jobs, and that food's going to be what you eat for that period of time. So you're not going to go in deeper into debt to feed the family. So that's a basic piece. Just having extra pantry items, extra canned goods, and a basic supply of water. Now, it's mostly drinking water that you need to be worried about. However, going over and above drinking water is truly ideal. Again, because I'm off-grid, I have a lot of water stored because I have to, because it's my only source of water. I don't have sewers and waters coming in from the utility system. I just don't have that. So I have to have several thousand or several hundred liters accessible at all times and several thousands of liters stored. Now, catching rainwater is an option, melting snow is an option in a really severe emergency. But even just filling those blue jugs, a few of them, goes a long way in an emergency. I want to be able to give tips that are much more far-reaching about being prepared in an emergency, and I'm going to do that. And I may just do a series of videos to share with people as all of this continues about how do you sanitize things. So let's say you're not sick, but you want to make sure you don't get sick. Keeping things sanitary around you is pretty basic. How do you do that properly? What does that even look like? What do you use? Again, believe it or not, there's people who don't know this. And you should know this. What do you do if you run out of toilet paper? And I shouldn't laugh about that. People are actually worried about all of this, and I think it's justified. I don't talk about that a lot because I live in the bush and I have the things I need, so I don't need to panic. But people going out and buying toilet paper, to me it tells me people are worried and they don't want to have to leave their house. And if they run out of something basic for sanitation like toilet paper, that they don't know what to do. And that's worrisome. You should know what to do if you run out of toilet paper. So tips like that. Tips like, first of all, you should have an extra store of medication. If you are on prescriptions, getting down to your last day's worth is really sketchy, especially if these are medications that you rely on for your health. So let's say you have severe asthma and you need inhalers. Having a few extra inhalers is a really good idea. If you are on blood pressure medication, you should have a backup amount. Don't leave it to the last couple of days, especially right now. it's a really good idea to go fill your prescriptions and just have a little bit of extra. And I'm not talking about hoarding things. This is just basic. This is normal, everyday preparedness, not emergency preparedness so far that I'm going through. The last really basic thing that anybody could do is fill a jerry can with fuel. If you drive, if you have a vehicle, having a jerry can available, that's pretty basic. I advise you to fill a jerry can. And I'm not talking a huge fuel drum. Now, I have a huge fuel drum and I can fill that. I'm just talking about having an extra 30 liters of fuel on hand. And clearly, you're not going to be able to get out of Dodge on that. And again, we're not talking about extreme preparedness. This is basic. So these are all things that you could go and do. Fill up some blue water jugs. Have some empty milk jugs. Fill them with water, although they don't do very well long term, just so you know. The hard plastic juice containers that you get orange juice in, fill some of those up. Pop bottles. Just having a basic water supply is a really good idea. Medications, a bit of food, a bit of money, and a bit of fuel. That's basic preparedness 101. And I hope that those who are scoffing at the reactions of others really see how important it is that those around them feel secure and prepared. Rather than laughing at others, although I admit that was my first reaction, however, I recognize that that's not going to help anybody. I need the people around me to feel safe and prepared, or I'm not safe. Because people fighting over the last toilet paper isn't safe. I'm going to try and share some more tips about beyond these basic pieces of being prepared. What do you do if you run out of your medication? Who do you call? If you have an emergency and you're not able to travel for whatever reason, how do you approach that? What are your backup options for staying warm? All of this is very important, and this is more extreme preparedness, and I don't mean extreme like extreme prepper. It's just environmental emergency kind of preparedness, or health emergency kind of preparedness like we are seeing in the world right now. I hope everybody can stay calm. I think that as long as you're a healthy adult or youth, you're going to be okay. But there are those with compromised immune systems, who are elderly, who are recovering from surgeries, people who have premature babies. We need to stay calm and not pass anything on to these people. And we need to be caring about what happens to them. I encourage everybody to check on your elderly neighbors. And maybe don't go and get right up in their faces and breathe on them, because that might make them nervous. However, give them a call. Know what your neighbor's phone numbers are. And be understanding and supportive to those who need it right now. The last piece is around children. Now, the great thing about this virus is that it has the least severe impact on children. Thank God. However, my girls came home from the city, so I have my girls part of the week, and they came home from the city panicked about what's going on, thinking that they were going to get sick and die. And it broke my freaking heart that that's what they thought. And my first reaction was to be angry at those around them, the adults who were saying these things around them and causing them to feel panic. And I then realized, well, it's all over the radio, so anybody listening to the radio is probably influencing them. And there are important important pieces of information for them, like they really need to wash their hands and not cough on people. And that is important. But I want to encourage you to manage what you're saying around children. Emergencies like this, natural disasters, political emergencies, all of these things affect children, even if it's not physically. And it's well known that PTSD, the panic that comes from not understanding the world with an adult mindset, and the adults around you not being able to even reassure you because your brain just doesn't work that way at that age, or people not being careful what you're exposed to, or being exposed to actual trauma in these circumstances. So be cognizant of what you're exposing the little people to. We don't need to traumatize them as we teach them to wash their hands, to not cough on people, to conserve water, to eat their food, all these basic pieces. We don't need to traumatize them with it. So, I hope everybody's well. I hope that you stay safe, that you feel safe, and that you take whatever precautions that you need to, whatever you feel that is, and that you keep in mind that there are people who do need more precaution than you because they are at a greater risk than you. All right, well, I am sure I'll see you again in a video as we approach some of these other topics.